Thank you so much for doing this. I'm super grateful to have this opportunity. And I'm super excited and interested to talk about the work that 52 Walker is doing currently. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what drew you into the art world and what art you were engaging in as a kid and what made you start thinking about art as a career.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words. Thanks for inviting me to do this. Um, I wasn't engaging with any art as a kid. I mean, I guess that's questionable for what we consider kid, right? I mean, before I didn't study art in undergrad. I went back to study it in grad school as an art critic. I did art criticism and curatorial practice, so I didn't really traditionally study art history. Um, but I think I was always really drawn to, I did study photography. I did that on my own while I was doing my anthro degree and pursued a second degree in photography, like practical studio practice, and actually worked very um, amateurly as a photographer for some time in Toronto doing like editorial stuff. Um, but I think I've always been drawn to artwork, even then, even before I was studying it, but kind of looking at art. I was drawn to more of like AV installs, things that I felt really comfortable with in terms of film, photography, sound, like sound installations I was really into. Um, I was doing some stuff in music, and I think I started being drawn, like as what you're doing in your everyday life, you start to see and be interested in the art world. Is how I was introduced to it.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's super interesting about your lens as a gallerist is I feel like there's sort of a pull in the exhibitions that I've been able to see, that kind of relationship between what is the artist interacting with in their daily life and kind of how does that inform their artistic practice feels super fresh and it feels unique to your view as a curator, which I think is really interesting to hear you talk about. I was wondering if you could talk about what your first sort of introductions, when you were practicing photography and when you were interested in audiovisual work, what was your introduction to the gallery world and what made you think about entering it as a career full time? Like, were there specific moments or was it a buildup over a period of time that made you interested in art? Like, how did that kind of work itself out in your head?
Sure. Um, I thought I was going to be an art writer, maybe a curator, but I really wanted to write about art. And as part of my master's, I had to do an internship. And so I decided to apply to a few places in New York. I didn't think I would move here at the time, but I thought it'd be great from Toronto to just get some experience here. And I applied to a few different places, um, a couple of art publishing companies, like thinking about writing, a couple of galleries, a couple of museums. And to the point of your question, I chose the gallery I chose because they were so heavily programmed with new media and AV. They're called Foxy Production, and they were very invested in artists who were using new mediums, new media, video, audio. Um, and I just felt it just felt cool. The name was Foxy Production. It didn't feel like a gallery, although it wasn't very traditionally like a formal commercial gallery, but the owners were cool. It was small. I got to do a lot of stuff. And so I applied for the internship. Foxy, I was really drawn to it once they accepted my kind of query for an internship. They didn't have anything posted. I wrote to them. I'd never been to the gallery before, but noticed that their program felt very, I think for someone like me who didn't study art, it felt a bit more accessible in ways. Like I could look on the website and knew what I liked and what I didn't and why. Playable links for things. They had this cool like 16 channel video installation. Like it just felt kind of cool. The name Foxy Production felt really up my alley. So I inquired about an internship and um, they accepted. I almost applied for something that didn't exist, right? I created my own internship and then they hired me. And I didn't have plans before then to work in a commercial gallery, but I had such a wonderful experience and it felt like it was a lot of everything I really wanted to do in the art world without me already knowing. And I worked there for 4.5 years.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that process of kind of like moving from just like observing, enjoying what Foxy was doing, and then kind of being a part of the actual kind of like behind the scenes of what goes into creating the product that is enjoyed by like consumers of art. Was there something that you remember first within the period in which you were interning where you were like, oh, this seems really fun, this seems enjoyable? Was there a specific element of that process that first stuck out to you, or was it just the overall like experience of working in the gallery itself?
Yeah, I think the overall experience was what really spoke to me. And in that, I loved my personal experience with them. I was involved in everything. Because it was a smaller gallery, I got to help install works. I got to work with artists. I got to speak to clients. I was, going to art fairs. I was sitting at the front desk answering phones, but I was also painting a wall when we were, ready for the new show. Like I was really involved in every detail and I loved it right away. It felt like you're always working on a cool project with your team and you're the production manager. It was like right up my alley.
That's cool. That hands-on experience seems really satisfying to be able to, because I think, as fans of art, you're kind of limited to that one-dimensional, like you walk into the gallery, you observe, maybe you come back multiple times, but it seems like to interact really intimately with like conceptually what's being done, physically what's being done, how's the space being developed, sounds like a really cool opportunity to get like a well-rounded perspective on like kind of the many hats that a gallerist wears, and kind of the multiplicity of functions that a gallery kind of functions in. Um, after Foxy Production, if my research is correct, you went to Shoot the Lobster and Martos Gallery. Um,
Yeah, there was one in between, but it's fine. I was the director at Michelinist and Nash,
oh, cool.
and then Marcos Gallery and Shoot the Lobster were owned by the same person. I did them at the same time.
Oh, very cool. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about first what the New York art scene was like during those years, and kind of what these experiences gave you looking back in terms of like skill sets, and interests that kind of shape the curatorial lens and kind of function with which you operate 52 Walker today.
Um, let me think. I mean, 52 Walker is the child of Martos and Shoot the Lobster. I was the director of both spaces, and Martos was very traditionally a commercial gallery space. We did, 8 art fairs a year, sometimes more, represented artists, had a full staff. And then Shoot the Lobster was sort of my personal project. It became really like my curatorial platform. They both were my curatorial platform, to be fair, but one just felt more traditional. And working across those scapes for, over 4 years made me realize the aspects of each that I would love to bring together to make kind of my perfect space, which is really years ago how the idea of 52 Walker came about, like how I wanted to work with artists and how I wanted to engage with viewers.
Yeah. And when you kind of were coming from this background of working, because it in a variety of different kind of representational models, functions within the art world, types of art that you were curating, and types of artists that you were working with. When you first found out that you would be the director of 52 Walker with David Zwirner, what was the kind of, was there a knee jerk in terms of the representational style or art that you wanted to curate that immediately was top of mind, that you were first most excited about or first most interested in introducing into art in New York City when in 2021 when you opened the gallery?
Yeah, I think like all curators, I have, you know, I have, you have a list of artists and things that you're interested in. And the artists that I started this program with were very probably, very possibly, and probably new to a lot of the viewers, but not new to me. So I really just drew from things that I'd already been doing. I've really been things that I've already been doing. You know, Candace. So the first year of announced shows, excuse me,
Bless you.
um, were Candace Williams, Nikita Gale, Nora Tirado, Tiana Nakia McLeod, and Tal Lewis. We announced that. I've worked with all of those artists in some capacity. Nora Tirado, not publicly, but we've been planning a Shoot the Lobster show. We wanted to do something together before I left. So I just kind of drew from things I was already excited about. And in whatever capacity I'd worked with those artists before, wanted to revisit their practice because I know I wanted to do something bigger. This is a space like no other for me to have full reign of. And I think going forward, it's the same. I mean, I don't feel like 52 Walker is necessarily a place for brand new discovery for me, even if I end up showing something I've never curated before, which is inevitably going to happen. It's definitely going to be an artist or practice that I've been following or been a fan of for some time. And I mentioned that difference in that it wasn't like that in Shoot the Lobster. Shoot the Lobster was much more a place for possible experimentation, and I would be open to meeting someone and for the first, you know, we just kind of do something, or I have an idea for a pop-up, or we, you know, it was really much more experimental in that way. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it totally does. And I think what I really like about 52 Walker and your perspective as a curator is it feels like there's a level of kind of personal relationship almost seems to drive the heart of what the space is from the viewer's perspective. You do a publication with each show. I think your voice in the writing comes across really clearly. I think there's a real level of continuity across like the shows that are exhibited, and so hearing you talk about that kind of personal relationship is really illuminating in that kind of in that context. In the process of opening, was there a specific challenge or element of opening the gallery that you didn't anticipate? And I'm also curious, tangentially to that, thinking that our publication is geared towards students, are there skills that you think are worth developing for students who are interested in being a gallerist, being a curator, being in contemporary art?
A thick skin. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not really kidding. You do have to have one. But I think I would. It really depends on the capacity with which you want to work in contemporary art. Like, I can't speak to a studio practice, for example. I'm not a studio artist, but for anyone interested in a gallery or museum career, I'm a huge advocate of interning. I run the internship program for not just 52 Walker, but David's Warner, New York, all of New York for that reason. I think opportunities to learn that are not necessarily tied to what you're studying, potentially it could be tied or it could not be, are unmatched. And if you can find an internship that is linked to something you're just genuinely interested in, and make it work for you where it's a true internship and you actually learn what it means to do that job, that's invaluable. I really, you can't, there's no class for working in a gallery. These like just, I mean, I guess this is all on the record, but I don't know how I feel about, there's some like contemporary art commercial market classes at places like Sotheby's and Christie's, but there's nothing to practically prepare you or to understand what it's like to work in the gallery. So I'd say try it out in any way that you can. And one thing that could really give you a leg up is to see lots of art. Just go and see shit. Like, always be seeing shit all the time. don't, even if like stuff that you don't like, whatever, um, be able to talk about it, go with friends.
Yeah, totally. And I think what is like in that is the experience of learning, right? It's like it's not just getting content, but it's like the kind of practical quality of being able to like experience art as kind of not just like a one-dimensional like formal analysis, what are you looking at, but also like in a very dynamic sense, how are people moving through a space, what is
Totally.
kind of being talked about, what's important to a gallery. One thing that makes 52 Walker interesting at an operational level is that it's non-representational, so you don't represent the artists that you're showing. What was the idea behind that as being a model for the gallery? Where did that come from?
To not represent artists in the
Yeah.
gallery.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have to always say this. It's like I'm not anti-representation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that model is there's a real reason for it, and it's important for artists to have someone to support them, some gallery, in my opinion. Um, I think that came from what you brought up earlier with this balance between Martos and when I was working at Martos and Chupa Lobster, where one was representational and one wasn't. There just was this sort of like your shoulders were down
Mm.
more. You were breathing a bit lighter at Shoot the Lobster um, in terms of expectation in your relationship. Like we didn't have to talk about anything after this project together, the
Mm.
artist and I. We're not talking about art fairs. I don't need to know what else they have planned or with whom. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't affect me. And that kind of freed up how we would talk about shows we wanted to do. It didn't impede. um, it's interesting. It would be the same if I represented artists, right?
Yeah.
If I represented artists and wanted to do a show, I don't care what they're doing, but within the larger web of the art world, a lot of other people care, and it might affect the artist differently, and they need to think about it differently. But as soon as I'm not representing, and it feels, to put it in not very cool words, but they feel like a free agent in working with me, it really opens up the conversation more. And the shows that I started doing felt more experimental and pushing boundaries, and conceptually were rigorous in a different way. I didn't have to worry about what the client or the people who come to see it are expecting. It was really just us working on a show. And curating for me is different now a little. My practice is forever evolving, so it's a little different than it was at Shoe the Lobster, but I do feel that not representing the artist affords us that freedom, a little bit of freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in the way that 52 Walker is formally described, um, is represent or showing artists that are research based and conceptual, and that the shows are a little bit longer than the traditional like 4 to 6 weeks of a gallery. And so I think that allows that plus the what you describe of that freedom that the artist has in a certain capacity allows kind of a shows with a certain level of depth or richness that I feel like for me as just an art fan really rewards like seeing them multiple times, seeing them with different people, seeing them, throughout the duration of the exhibition. And so I think it all kind of comes together, like the different perspectives that any gallery has kind of create a unique experience. And so it feels like that is really what makes 52 Walker super rich. I think the other side of that made me just like from just being a regular fan of you and your curatorial work to being like a mega fan was the way that 52 Walker was rolled out, and specifically the logo being inspired by the original Cash Money logo. I was wondering if you could talk about where that came from, because that was just like such an awesome moment, and what was the inspiration and ideas behind that?
The inspiration for that was with my fabulous creative team clocks, who are Chloe and Mafu Sultan. And I had a really great experience working with them as a team and kind of ideating what the vibe of 52 Walker was before we even had full like architectural plans, like really first starting with what's in my brain and then getting to once the architects were confirmed and we had floor plans and thinking through the space and the building and physicalness of the space. I mean, every aspect. We had like mood boards, and I actually, the 52 Walker Instagram account is what we started privately, and I would post like whatever for them to see, and vice versa. They would post. We were just like sharing ideas. Um, yeah, and Cash Money logo felt super apt because one, the history of the record label, graphic design wise, also it was super forward for like hip hop labels. It's iconic. Um, we love Birdman and Lil Wayne. I
Of
mean,
course.
just yeah, speaking frankly to the label, but I mean, a lot of that comes from me being able to bounce off a team like Clocks. It was really helpful. It was really good, and like drawing what feels natural and comes normal to me. I mean, hip hop and music was my life before art. And so not trying to reinvent the wheel for what I'm doing here, but drawing off of things that I know.
Yeah, and I think there's this rhetoric of, I think, in art, in academia, in almost everything in the past couple years, of like the role of like black representation in a certain kind of way, and I feel like what it often kind of like gets interpreted into is like a summer long exhibition at the Met or MoMA, or something that is kind of like easy to understand in the context of how institutions function or like create product, if that makes sense. But I think
Mm-hmm.
what made me so excited to talk about you, and just what makes me such a fan of like your work, is that it seems like it is speaking to black people in a way that seems very direct. And I think like the subtlety of the Cash Money logo is so personal to, if you were growing up black, listening to a certain reference point, listening to certain music. I can share like the when 52 Walker first came out, I was sending the posts back and forth with my friends at a very personal level, because it's that shared kind of joy, celebration, acknowledgement of, this is what we're already talking about. It makes sense to us, right? And it kind of lives its own life in our sort of dynamic relationship, just as the music did, or just as the graphic design does. Is that something that is like top of mind for you as you're creating, or is it just that natural part of talking, conversation, what feels natural, and it kind of derives from that process, or is it a synthesis of the two? Like, where is your mind at in terms of its reception with black students, black art people?
What a direct question. I love it because 3 years ago, when this was just an idea and it was announced in the New York Times, I would have avoided the question and really have worked to shape the perception of the space to not be black when everyone knows it's black, you know? Which is actually why I'm smirking, because it's nice to hear that that's how it's received, from the black community in particular. Um, the problem is that if I were to overtly discuss and write about the space as being black, whatever that means, right? It brings other people into the conversation in a very tenuous way, and I work really hard to make it an art space for everyone, not to sound too hokey, but I'm a black woman, and it's very natural for me to lean on my identity, and it would be unnatural for it not to come across. So I as opposed, I guess what I'm saying is, if I were to talk about it, I would say I don't overtly try to make it black. I'm using air quotes for people reading. But I want to be as honest as possible with my own identity, which is super black. I identify as, my name's Ebony. It's been a life of blackness, that I love and wouldn't change. Um, and I think the art world is super white, to speak, I can give you some generous comments since you've been generous with your perception of the space. I was the only Black person at many art fairs for many years, many years. It's been written about now some, but there is a group of Black women who meet called Entre Nous, started by Courtney Willis Blair. And when we started, there was 5 people in it. And not all of those people worked in museums. I worked in galleries. We had to expand the definition of why we were meeting to just have a group. And thankfully it's gotten larger, but it's ridiculous that, some galleries to this day have never hired a Black director or artist liaison, but the works on the walls are by Black people. And I also wanted to make sure the space felt welcoming for people who don't have that much experience or not sure what to do or what it's like to go into art. I mean, I didn't go into a single art gallery until I interned in one. I don't know if anyone knows that truth, but that's the truth. I lived in a place that had art galleries in Toronto, but I'd never gone in one commercial space until I interned. And maybe that's because I didn't feel like I could be there. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think for me, what is exciting about this process, the explicit dialogue about blackness, but also the implicit dialogue, I think Cash Money is a perfect example. No one needs to necessarily say, in a heavy-handed sense, Cash Money is a Black business, because it makes music for everybody, right? Like, these are the highest grossing artists, right? Like, they eventually go on to create Drake, who's like the most ubiquitous artist in the world, right? And also there is an entry point or sort of like a conceptual genesis that's unable to be derived or taken from what it means to be Black in such a variety of different contexts. I think for me, what makes me feel what feels like from the perspective of like being a young person interested in art is that not only acknowledgement of like almost like implicitly saying you exist, but also more than that, saying there is a space for what you find interesting, the conversations that you're having, the dialogues that you're having, to be in art in this way. I think like maybe when MoMA, PS1, or the Whitney or the Guggenheim or any like major gallery has a Black exhibition or has something showcasing, Black artists, that's one level of acknowledgement institutionally, like Black people are welcome here in a communal way, and it does something. But I think that's very different from in a very explicit way, like the dialogues that Black people, Black communities are having external to the gallery are also being had internally to the gallery. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is just kind of where my mind goes in hearing you talk. And I think that discussion of what it means to feel welcome in a space in dialogues with friends, or thinking about what it means to be someone, walking into galleries. I feel for me, like maybe I don't know how to talk super formally about like composition on a canvas, but I feel confident talking about, Lil Wayne, Birdman, Nicki, Drake, right? And I think there's just something very subtle in that process of like what it means to be kind of in welcomed truly, like in a meaningful way. I know also you have a lending library, and you have a series of summer classes that you did previously for Black students. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the gallery in that sense and what you see it can be, like what the space of a gallery can be in a community?
Sure. I mean, the lending library came about. You're making me sound very smart and pointed in my decisions, but in all honesty, it really comes from a place of it's something organic. I don't know. I wish that I started out with a platform that was pro education and access. I mean, I guess technically I am and don't realize it, but yes, to your point, I teach Black students for free, anyone who's interested in a career in an art gallery or museum. And we offer a free lending library. I mentioned it sounds like I'm very more thoughtful than I feel. Maybe I should give myself more credit. But I really just wanted, the lending library came about in that I always wanted people to access more about the shows, to your point, in different ways. Maybe they don't want to talk about the composition of this collage or painting, but maybe it's interesting for them truly from the conceptual side to know what the artist and I have been reading. So I thought about publishing just a list online, like this, almost like an annotated bibliography, which in my mind, even as I was writing it up, I'm like, no one's going to read this. This is just like an exercise for my poor staff to start summarizing books, and we're just going to put it up there. And when I put the list together, for the first three shows, because I would be, we were working on the shows concurrently, it was like one extra step to hit order on an Amazon cart instead of, there's not crazy amounts of books. And then it became a glamour project where I was really leaning into my love of the material. And I wanted library cards, and I wanted a, cataloging system that was unique to 52 Walker, nowhere else, with card inserts that you get stamped, and you come like this whole process Mylar covering the books. And I'm pleasantly surprised at how used it is. Like, people are really utilizing it, which feels great, whether you can come in and get the books. But I mean, access to information is kind of what museums and galleries are. It's just the kind of information you choose to give. So you can come in and see the show, or you can come in and get a book out that inspired the show. Yeah. I also was planning for the space to be even more engaging with visitors and community, and had written up, like, my early briefs for the space included a lot of events. Like, I thought I'd have this calendar filled with events like book signing, poetry, music, a panel discussion. I haven't had a single event in the space. And that's not to say it won't ever happen, but I think just the capacity of the team and how much work goes into a show by the time it's up and running, it's hard to think about alternative events. But I do like to think of ideas for getting people in. And we're open until 8 every Thursday, for example, to try and feel more like a museum to get people into. And we don't close in the summer like most galleries who close in August. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there is what I think makes your like practice exciting is there seems to be this idea of like the opening conceptually up the idea of the gallery in a particular way with like the library, the model of representation, and the way people interact with that. Kind of as like even if it is a gallery and it functions in the same way, there are still subtle interventions that are made into kind of like the fundamental framework, which makes it feel super like fresh and inviting into new experiences, which is really really cool. I had one more question. I know we're butting up against the end of time.
That's okay. I've just been texting my team to say I took so much time away from us.
Thank you. I appreciate
go
it.
ahead.
Thank you. I think I really appreciate like the conceptual framework that the gallery has, but also like the actual work that's being shown. The exhibition that I think has been most interesting and useful to me was Gordon Matta Clark and Pope L, who are two of my favorite artists. Pope L is my number one all-time favorite artist.
Mine too.
Right, for so many reasons. Well, first, I'm just curious why he's your favorite artist, and also, like, of course, how those two artists were in conversation with each other, how they came about. But yeah, anything about that, because I have so many just thoughts.
Yeah. So I discovered Pope Bell's work in grad school, just reading and writing about art, and really started to use him as a marker for trying to understand or wrap my brain as a then would-be critic around performance art. And his early performances really like captivated me. I wasn't sure. I was intrigued by how somebody how you like qualify that as an artwork, and he was thinking through that as well. His writings was really intriguing and really accessible and funny. It's hilarious. And I ended up using some of that in my research for my thesis in grad school. And then that one little glimpse of a gallery trajectory for me that you missed at Mitchell and Nash, I took that job. They like came to me from Foxy Production because they represent Popel, and I said that I would join the gallery if I could work with him. So at the time that was my dream job. I got to work directly with Popel. I remember flying to Chicago to meet him. I was like, it's funny when you meet artists you're a fan of. It's like meeting a famous rapper. You're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
hi, Popel. Is it Mr. Popel?
Yeah.
I was just like fumbling at the studio, and he was just like, he's like old uncle, you know, like, chill, girl, what's up?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I read this thing that you wrote, and read this thing, I wrote this thing about you, and I think his work is so smart. I think that he is an example of conceptual practice materialized as object in a way that's super successful. He's never interested in compromising, and a career that spans decades. Like, finding success for him came so late in life, and it didn't matter. He never strayed from what he saw his practice to be, and if you get it, you get it. Also, his kind of reflection on Blackness and the Black community in relationship to his artwork really spoke to me, and how he tried to find ways for everyone to enter conversations and not feel like subject matter. Like, Black people are definitely the subject of his work, but it would never. That's not me. That's not the crude intention. His play on. He's just so smart. He's really smart. For the record, if you ever meet him, he's super generous and funny, and he's the most generous artist to students. He will, I hope he doesn't hate me for saying this, but he will always make time for students, which is something that I think about a lot whenever I have a request, and have modeled myself that way for over 5 years, and started teaching for free because you guys, students are doing it. We can make time for everything else. We should be able to make time for interesting questions and queries. So that's one of those are many of the few reasons. Those are just a few of the many reasons I love Popel. That show, Gordon Matta Clark and Popel, actually comes from when I was working with him. He was being nominated for Venice that year to represent the United States. It was the year Mark Bradford got it. I think it was 2015. And we had worked on a proposal together for the American Pavilion. And we didn't get it. But when I got 52 Walker approved as the space, I immediately thought of Popel and that project. Gordon Matta Clark came in because he's also one of my top artists. Both of them are in my top 5. So, working now at Davis Warner, where they represent the estate of Gordon Matta Clark, I've never been so close to access of the work from the estate. It was very exciting for me. And I brought them together because I just being fans of the work. I always use music analogies, but I said this to Popel. He asked why I brought them together. It's like when you think to your head who would be a great feature on somebody's album, who you hope comes out on as a feature. Popel loves music too, by the way. And I just personally have always wanted to see them together in some way, and I was the one who did it. They both love holes. They're both hilarious. They both rethink ideas of space and place. I just their sketches are the work often. It seemed to just really make sense to me, and it was really fun. So I started by pitching that we do the thing we didn't do for Venice, and I told him how I envisioned that working with Gordon, and he was into it. The work didn't end up looking anything like the Venice work.
Sure.
It evolved to be something great.
I think one thing that didn't occur to me until now, but I think that for both of them, their sort of perspective as artists are super similar. Like what interests them, the kind of conversations, the dialogues that sort of they feel a pull towards representing through their work, kind kind of work in almost like in symbiosis with each other. I think the first thing that made me fascinated with Pope L's work was the Crawl series, just like that physical act of using like your body as the medium. I think is something that in conceptual art or in performance art is talked about a lot, but it was one of the first times to really see it manifested really immediately. And so it was, I think that was a cool entry point to think about Gordon Clark's work with buildings and architecture. Like oftentimes the kind of complete product of an architecture is kind of finished in a proper way is interesting in these similar interventions. And I think the exhibition was really cool to kind of draw those parallels out of each other. And just what you said with the feature, I feel like it brought the best of both of them in a new to create something new and generative. That was really fresh and exciting.
That's so nice, generous of you to say. Thank you. Yeah, I really, when I was planning it, I think I said to David Sworn, I was like, this is my magnum opus. I don't know what to do after. It's like I'm putting two of my top artists together.
Yeah.
And there we go.
Yeah. Turning to close, thank you so much for your time. You've been super generous, and it's been wonderful to get to talk. I think my thought with these interviews was always talking to people who not only I admire, but I think are contributing something positive towards kind of their community. And I feel like I can give like a certain portion of my own perspective in art, architecture, writing, I think in a lot of ways to your work. And I think they're super, like when you do things creating for a community, you don't always see or get that feedback immediately, maybe not, of like what your work does. But I always want to say thank you so much for what you do and for like kind of the conversations that you allow. I'm super grateful to be able to talk.
That just made my whole year because you put things out into the ether. I don't really need to hear it from people, but it's nice to hear, and I appreciate you.
Yeah.
And, it's all about people like you. I mean, me too. It's like about us. Anyone who wants to do the work. It's awesome. Awesome. I'm honored to be around. So thank you.
Yeah, we're grateful to have you. My last question, I know you talk a lot about music, and you think a lot about music. I was wondering either what you're listening to now, or if there are albums or artists that you come back to regularly or that have been on repeat recently.
That's my podcast question.
I stole that. It's a little. I hope I get to turn the question back on you because I feel like I rarely get to hear your answer.
But I have a podcast.
I do.
I don't know if you know. Mm-hmm. That's the way we base our question or my podcast off. It's so funny to have it on me. What am I listening to now? Well, I'm actually in the middle of making on the podcast. I tried to make a B-side playlist or like a listening mix for the guest, and I'm currently deep into Toronto rap for the Tao Lewis episode that aired, and I'm making her playlist.
Awesome.
I'm revisiting a lot of Toronto rap beyond Drake. There's
Sure.
lots of it out there for anyone interested. And my regular return to albums. You know what is a weird EP I often play? I play it a lot. Not a lot, but it's like a subway ride. Sometimes if I don't want to look for new music. It's this very 3-song EP by Young Thug called Anybody Up Now.
What era Young Thug are we talking? Are we talking like mixtape era? Are we talking like Slime Season?
Post Jeffrey.
Okay.
But like a glimpse in, just like a mixtape era coming out in between having reclaimed like world-renowned albums. Let's see if I'm butchering the title. No, I'm pretty sure it's Anybody Up Now. Anyways, that's something that I revisit often.
I'm excited to check it out. I haven't heard it. I'm a huge Young Thug fan. I think Young Thug was in my top 5 most listened to this year, so I'm very excited. As Drake being like the hometown.
2018. 2018. It's called Hear No Evil.
Oh, awesome.
But that's why I call it Anybody Up Now, because he cleverly, the three songs are Anybody and Up and Now.
Oh, with the like the 21 Savage feature on
Yes.
it. Yeah, yeah. Oh, banger. Yeah. Yeah, because he
Yeah.
wasn't missing. Like that for like 2 years there was zero misses. Like
Yeah.
Slime
I
season.
play it. It's still something, like, I share Spotify, a family Spotify with my partner, and they'll see that I've played it again or
Yeah.
something. It's like, again. I'm like, oh, it's just solid. It's like a great walk from the train.
Yeah, it's gonna be in the Louvre one day. Just wait. Uh,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much for your time. This is super wonderful. It's super wonderful to get to talk. And yeah, keep up the amazing work. We're huge fans.
Thank you so much. If when you do make it back into the space, please announce yourself so we can meet in person.
We'll do. We can make it happen.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.